Hello quilters, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel, this is Rachel Quilts. This weekend I am making a baby quilt. As you can see here, I have a colleague and a friend who is about to go on maternity leave, and I really want to include this quilt in her little box of presents that all the staff are giving her. This quilt you might recognize. I made a full king size quilt with this pattern, and these were actually leftover blocks. Don't waste those blocks. Pop them into a baby quilt. So I'm going to use the same backing as I did with my king size quilt as well. So if you would like to watch me make this actual block, you'll need to go and find the king sized playlist, and you can watch me make that quilt from start to finish, including how I get these beautiful curves on this quilt. All right, so the pattern itself I didn't create either. That will be linked below, so you can see the designer of this quilt. First thing I think I need to do is the batting. I have some scraps. Oh, let me reach over. Ooh. I have some scraps that I'm going to use, and they are too thin. It's too thin. So I'm going to cut this in half and zigzag it together. So I'll show you how to do that. Then I'm going to be sandwiching the quilt together. I usually use the tabletop method for my large quilts, with the weight of the quilt keeping the fabric taut. But because this is a baby quilt, I will need to use the masking tape to keep it nice and taut. So that will be the next step. I'm going to pin baste that, and then I'm going to be quilting this on my domestic machine and doing a binding. So you can step forward to whichever chapter is most suitable for you, what you need to watch, or continue watching this whole video. Thank you for joining me. The edges of this leftover batting are cut with scissors, and I need a really straight line so I can zigzag them together. So I'm just going to use my rotary cutter to cut a straight line. So just looking, making sure I'm getting it, all the layers cut at the same time. I folded this into quarters just to make one cut. Okay, so that has a straight line. Yep. And then I do need to cut it in half. So on the fold, I'll just take the edge off. So now I can butt the two straight lines together and zigzag them down the center. So my width is set on 7 and my length is set on 3.5 of my zigzag, keeping both the edges of the batting together but not overlapped. Sandwich this quilt, the back down, and we want that nice and tight taut. So I'm going to use masking tape. Actually, let's put it this way. So nice firm tug to put that opposite side down. And again here. Okay, then our piece of batting. Which way shall I put it? Put it that way. So I won't masking tape the batting. It's quite heavy, and if you just spread it out with your hands from the middle outwards, I find that it stays in place. Then our quilt top, how gorgeous does this look? I really like that. So it's the 4 blocks from my king, and then I just popped, I had extra of this blue, so I put a little border around it. It's a bit cute. And obviously just making sure that you have the 3 layers together. So I didn't have a whole lot of that other fabric, so that's why I don't have much room, but that's okay. As long as the back and the batting are bigger than your quilt top, that is all that you need. They do say about 10 centimeters extra around, but I obviously don't have that today, and that's going to be fine. Still going to fit on the fabric. And with my palm, just spreading from the center outwards to get out any lumps and bumps, and checking on every side that I have some back fabric. Yep, I do. Okay. And then I'm going to use pins. I have a glass top table. I only very lightly sort of go down and then I quickly go up. I find I haven't scratched my table. Be careful though, especially if you have a nice wooden table. And I have heard a trick recently that you put your cutting mat underneath where you're going to be pinning, and then it saves your table. So I've placed the pins around a hand, or maybe a stretched out hand space apart from each other. And then all around the edges. So how am I going to quilt this? How am I going to quilt this? For the larger quilts, when I'm doing them at home, I just do like straight line quilting, or I use one of my decorative stitches that I'm sewing in straight lines with my walking foot. Because this is smaller, I mean, I do have the opportunity to do something a little bit more complicated than I usually do. The first thing that comes to mind is to follow these loops. So I could do loop, 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 and then sort of go loop, loop, loop. I'm not really sure how I do that, but I'm going to do straight line stitching with my walking foot because that is great for keeping my 3 layers together and I won't get any tucks or bumps. So definitely walking foot is your best friend. Or I could be lazy and just do pretty much what I did for my king size quilt. It's too late to ask you because by the time you see this, it will be done. I think I should experiment. So, loops. Let's do loops. I'm going to use this variegated purple thread on the top. There is no purple in my quilt. However, I just love quilting with a variegated thread, and I do have blue and pink, so it will go in between. It'll be nice on the grey and not too bad on the orange. That's fine. And this is going to be my bobbin, which is going to match my back fabric. So the bobbin is filled and in, so I'll just thread my machine with this purple. You know what I don't have on me? My glasses. That's going to be a problem when I try and thread this needle. I also need to put my walking foot on. So what do I need? I need to take this whole thing off. Maybe I'll get this sorted and get back to you. Down and up, holding that thread will bring up the bobbin thread. If you're a new quilter and didn't know that, I always lift up the bobbin thread before I start quilting or sewing for that matter, and putting that up at the back. I have decided to follow the loops. So straight stitch, I want about 2.5. Test. You want to test, so this is 2 bits of fabric with batting in between, so you want to test on the same thickness as your quilt and give it a run. Because you want to see if the stitches are nice and straight. Sometimes they get a bit wonky if that's not right, and you don't want to see the bobbin thread coming up to the top. You don't want to see the top thread going down to the bottom, and mine is perfect, so I'm ready to go. I'm going to stitch along like that. And I don't like stitch in the ditch, because I always feel like you get it wrong by a millimeter and it looks bad. So I'm going to go about 1/4 of an inch to one side of the loop. But I do need to estimate it up here, because obviously I don't have the loops going right to the edge. So I am going to do edge to edge quilting on this quilt, so I won't need to start and stop in the middle of the quilt, which is just an extra step I don't need. Maybe I'll line up. Maybe I'll do it more than 1/4 inch, because I'll line up the edge of my, the edge of my foot along that line, that seam line. So let's try that. So that's about there. Here we go. Just got to get into it and hope for the best. So relax your shoulders. Have an extra table around if you can. So this lifts the quilt up nice, keeping this top nice and flat. I don't really use gloves. I find that my hands are fine. Now I do have to start turning my quilt to follow this seam line. You can go as slow as you want. Check my stitches. Yes, looks good. I have it on length of 2.5. Did I tell you that? This is a Janome Memory Craft 6600. I have had it for about 15 years. And yeah, I love it. Not sponsored, but happy to if you're watching Janome. Oh, that looks lovely. Pins out as you go. Can you see that? Great. So you have seen me use this bar before in other videos. The bar comes with the machine and it is helpful when you're making echo lines. However, it's not very long and it's not really sturdy. So it's wobbly. So Janome, that's one thing I think needs to be fixed if we can have a longer and more sturdy bar. But anyway, because I do want probably to be the same distance here as there. So therefore this edge needs to run along this edge, which means I need to basically have my bar at that position because it'll be okay for this line. Oh, sorry guys. Because I'll be able to follow here. But for the other lines, I will need this bar and it's right on the edge. And see how wobbly it is? But let's see how that goes. Okay, that line actually ran out, I remember. So I will need this bar in and line it up with this stitch line. So now I'm going to be following this bar and making sure my stitch line is even distance from there. Bit trickier. Much trickier. You got to look at this bar and you got to look at this foot to make sure you're not hit any safety pins. And keep it all flat. Good for the brain. So all the quilting is finished and there was a few parts where I had to sort of change pattern. So obviously when we're coming along here, the next pass, there is not enough room to do a loop. I went up to this point, I just put the needle down and turned the machine and turned the quilt and headed back out. So these are more points and there's one here as well and here. And then it was also really hard here. I went around this curve and then I was coming around this curve and I realized I got too close and I was trying to turn and it is a bit wobbly. So I'm not sure if you can see that stitching. So it's not perfect, but it is all complete and the recipient will think it's perfect, even if it's not. So the next step is to trim the quilt down and add the binding. I will be sewing this binding on the back, folding it over to the front and running a machine stitch along the front. I do usually do the hand stitching method where I fold it over to the back and hand stitch for all my other quilts. But because I'm in a hurry and because this baby will throw up on this and it will need to be chucked in the wash more often than a regular quilt, I think. So having it machine quilt will be nice and sturdy. Machine attached will be nice and sturdy. So I'll just square up this quilt. I'm going to be taking my line on my quilt along the edge of this border to make sure that my border on each 4 sides is the same. I am going to trim it a tiny bit away from the edge because it is really raggedy. And that will be nice and neat. So how much? It will need to be 1 3/4 inches. 1 3/4 inches. Yep. So the corners of quilts do need to be square, so use your ruler to help you get that nice 45-degree angle. That helps you with the mitred edge of the mitred corner of your binding. So 1 3/4 inches, and this looks so good. The binding I had left over from my king size quilt, just measure that for you. It is 2 3/4 inches wide, and then it is joined together in one long strip and folded down in half lengthways. So I will be adding this to the back first. So you start in the middle of a side, you leave about a ruler's length, you attach raw edge to raw edge, and stitch a row of stitching. You're 1/4 inch in or a bit more than that. Oh, let's not have purple threads. We want this to be quite invisible. So I will use the same on the bobbin, this thread that I used on the bobbin. Let's put that in. Raw edge on raw edge. I can test that as well by folding it up and over and just checking that it's going to cover that row of stitching, which it is. Okay, stop 1 seam allowance distance away from the edge and backtrack a little bit. Okay, cut and take off. Now we want to change the direction of our quilt so that we have the new side that we're going to stitch here in front of us. We put our binding backwards. Okay, getting a nice 45-degree angle with the fold of the binding, and then bring it forwards so we have the fold going along the top of the quilt. So that should be nice and neat, the 2 folds there together, and this raw edge on raw edge again. So now we can just slot back in there, needle down. I've noticed it doesn't really make a difference now if you go from the edge or your seam allowance in. So just start somewhere in that vicinity. I do a few backtracks and continue. So I have gone all the way around all 4 corners, and now I'm left with the start and the finish that we need to join up the binding and then stitch the rest down. So it's really easy to get a diagonal seam on here. What you need to do is overlap the 2 bits of fabric by the width of the binding. So I'm just going to actually take a bit off. So, and I can use that bit that I took off. This is the width. So I need the overhang, the overlap. So I can pop that there like that. So here's the edge of the binding. Here's the width of the fabric. And I need to overlap by that much. So I just then trim that top one right there. The pieces are both overlapped by the width of the binding. Easy. Chuck that away. Pull this one out and put it right side up. And then pull this one out and do right side down. And then pin these in position. You want to sew a diagonal. You want to sew a diagonal stitch line so that you can cut off a triangle of fabric. So it goes from that corner to that corner. Can you see that? So I'm going to actually pin this because that will be, this is quite close. Could have done that better. Oh well. So that's why you leave plenty of, I could have started this down further and had more space to do this. Pinning, I'm going to pin one this way. Remembering I want to stitch along this way to cut off a triangle. So I'll put my pins so they won't be in my way, and one this way. So I'm just stitching from this corner to this corner. I can draw a line in there if I'm nervous about getting that correct. However, I'm a wing it sort of girl. I'm just going to start stitching, aim for the other corner. Take the pins out. But before you cut anything, really important just to open it up and test that it's going to lay flat along the edge of your quilt, which it will. That's fine. So I can cut this triangle off now. And just finger press them down. And go back and stitch as if it were just my regular straight line. Wonderful. Okay. We're now going to pull this up from the back, pull it out. Oh, I've got some threads I can just trim up. So as I said, pull that out, up and over, and then running a stitch line along the edge of the binding. I've got some threads there too. Where did they come from? So it doesn't matter which side you start on, just start somewhere in the middle of a row, of a side. And as I sew, I'm just pulling and bringing over to the front and doing little parts at a time. Beautiful. Okay. Corner is coming up, so stay tuned for that. Threads everywhere. Why do I have threads everywhere? Okay, when you get to a corner, pull it out at the bottom and the side. And again, just pulling over and holding in place all the way down to the bottom. So we sew that first. Okay, you do want to stop around here because you need to pull up this bottom and fold it up over. I hope you can see that. You can pin that, sort of use those clamps if you wanted to, but I use my fingers. And you can see that that is already made a nice mitered corner, just like if you're wrapping up a present. So I hold that in place as best I can until my needle goes over it and catches it. Needle in the down position, lift up and turn. And down again. And then continue to sew. So it's all complete. So just one colour on the back. So this quilt could be used like on the floor as a play mat, like to lie the baby on, or it could be used in the pram to keep the baby warm. You could even double that up and tuck it around them, or in the cot. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know down in the comments what you thought of this project. I have plenty more playlists and videos about all the different steps in the quilting process. So there are plenty of videos about quilting, there are plenty of videos about sandwiching, there are plenty of videos about binding. So make sure you check out some of the other videos. I'll leave some of my favorite videos linked down below in the description that might help you in your quilting. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.